Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Jeff Clapes, the traveling librarian from the reference department at BB Library. Since we're all stuck at home and travel is pretty much off the table for the time being, I thought you'd enjoy some armchair travel instead. And WCAT has generously partnered with BB Library to help us continue to bring our programming to you in any way we can. And I'm pleased to have you join me today for a tour of the county of Devon in England. This is part of a trip that I took in the fall of 2019, where we visited various sets of friends in Oxfordshire, Somerset, and also Cornwall. I will be doing programs for those areas as well, and I hope you'll be able to join me in the coming weeks to tour them too. Now, just by comparison's sake, you can see this is an outline of Massachusetts kind of over the southeastern part of Britain, southwestern, sorry. To give you a rough idea of the size of the place. Devon is maybe about half the size of Connecticut, but it is the fourth largest county in England. You can see it outlined here. And it has about 1.2 million people, which is considerably less than Massachusetts. So it's pretty sparsely populated, except for a couple of decent sized towns, which are Exeter and Plymouth. We're going to visit both of those in a little bit. There's a lot of good, solid English food in Devon, of course. On the left, you can see fish and chips, although this is the fancy kind from a gastropub. And on the right is Devon cream tea, one of the traditional meals that they serve there, usually in the afternoons. And it involves good English tea, fresh home-baked scones, with jam, usually some kind of fruit jam like strawberry, and clotted cream, which you can see in a little container up on the top of the plate. It's important to note that people are kind of fussy about their cream teas in Devon. When you eat it in Devon, you slice the scones in half, and it's very important to put the cream on first and then put the jam on. As soon as you cross the border into Cornwall, where you'll get Cornish cream teas, they do it exactly the opposite way. You put in Cornwall, you put the jam on first, then followed by the clotted cream. Tourists, they're pretty okay with tourists, so they'll cut you some slack if you do it the wrong way. We're going to start our tour in Exeter, which is, as I said, one of the largest towns with about 130,000 people. It's also the county seat or the capital of Devon. And it has a wonderful waterfront, even though it's not actually on the English Channel. It's on the River Exe up a few miles. But because of that, it has a very nice waterfront with a promenade, shops, restaurants, and so forth. It's a nice town for strolling around. There's a lot of pedestrian areas, and also a lot of nice old half-timbered medieval buildings, many of which have been modernized to new uses, like this one here with these great windows, which is now an Urban Outfitters clothing store. But the highlight of Exeter is its cathedral, which goes back to the year 1400. It used to have large cloisters, but those were destroyed during the English Civil War. And also on this side, there used to be a side chapel, which was destroyed during an air raid in 1942 during World War II. Inside the building, there's a Lego model that you can see here on the right. They're doing a long-term restoration program of the cathedral, and the Lego model is gradually being built to show you how far along the donation progress is going. Exeter is known for having the longest continuously vaulted ceiling in England, and that's a result of the fact that it has no center tower, which is kind of unusual for a European cathedral. So there's no tower over the transept, which means the entire nave is one long continuous run of Gothic vaulting. Here is a carved minstrel's balcony from the 1360s that shows a number of individual musicians playing medieval musical instruments. There are tombs of various famous people throughout the building. Here's a better view of the long vaulting. You can see at the top of the vaults, there are a number of little medallions with gold around them. These are called bosses, and they're located at each of the crossings where the ribs in the vaults cross. And there are over 400 of them in the cathedral. Here's a better view of the west window. And a close-up of one of the bosses to see, you can see how elaborately carved they are. Each one is unique and different. And this one shows the killing of St. Thomas à Becket, his murder. There are also very beautiful choir stalls that have elaborate carving. And here you can see a kind of unusual one with a carved elephant, which is a little strange to be seeing in southern England. The cathedral is also known for its incredibly huge organ. You can tell from the pipes on the right-hand photo and compare them to the size of that doorway, just how large some of these pipes are. Some of these go a good 20 or 30 feet high. It is one of the biggest organs in England. And also here you can see the South Tower. The South Tower has the second heaviest bells, church bells, in the world after the ones in Liverpool Cathedral, which is not too far north of Exeter. As I said, it's not actually an ocean town, but because it's still so close to the English Channel, you do get a number of seabirds, and it does feel very much like a coastal city. And when I'm traveling, I also feel the need to beware of children too. I found this kind of funny to see on the sidewalk as I was walking around. Moving further west, we are going to start to see some of the national park area in Dartmoor, which we'll visit in a little bit. We stayed in Morton Hampstead, which is kind of a small market town without a whole lot to do, but that makes it a very nice place to stay. It's an ideal location on the edge of Dartmoor, so it's a good spot for taking day trips around the area. This photo shows the building on the left with the two gables was our bed and breakfast, a wonderful country inn called the Old Post House that is built over the old post office, which is still running today. And here's the view from our room. Very comfortable place and very inexpensive. Morton Hampstead does have, which is great for visitors, a lot of local pubs and restaurants. Some of them are kind of fancy gastropubs, but many of them are just traditional local places where all the local residents go to hang out and visit. And Brits, of course, love their dogs, so anytime you go to a restaurant or a shop, you're very likely to see all of the local dogs there as well with their owners. Really, the only site of major interest in Morton Hampstead is the church. The parish church is very pretty and has a nice churchyard around it. The town also has a few interesting galleries, art galleries, and craft shops. And we were surprised to find this sort of artsy public art tucked away on a side street. But the pubs are really nice. It's a nice way to get a sense of daily life in Britain. Morton Hampstead, because it doesn't have a lot of tourists, makes you feel more like you're hanging out with the locals. We tended to see the same people there every night. And there's very good hearty English food. There's a lot of popular meat pies. This is an example of a chicken pie, cockaliki pie. So it has leeks and chicken in it with a cream sauce, chips, and vegetables. And also, you can get a wide variety of local ales and ciders, lots of good microbrews to try from the local area. And of course, in the morning, this is our full English breakfast at our inn, which we had almost every day we were there. Bacon, eggs, sausage, fried tomatoes, fried mushrooms, good coffee, tea, and so forth. It's a good hearty way to start the day. Not too far from Morton Hampstead, and built right on the edge of Dartmoor, is a fascinating and somewhat unusual castle to visit. There are lots of castles and stately homes that you can visit in southwestern England, and this is certainly one of the more unusual ones. It's known as the last castle in England. It was built between 1910 and 1930 by a famous architect called Edwin Lutyens, and it is still, even today, undergoing some restoration because it has had long-standing water problems, even right from the point when it was built. In fact, it was built by a man named Julius Drew out of local granite, and it's on a very high hill that has beautiful views over the Devon countryside. Lutyens is one of England's most famous architects, certainly the most famous of the 20th century, the early 20th century at least. And the castle is an interesting mix of traditional medieval, but also modern sensibilities. This is the main hall and the stair hall with its fantastically huge window that goes down to the dining room. You can freely walk around most of the castle and explore it on your own. This is the library and billiard room, which has an absolutely enormous fireplace off in the corner. And in the bedroom wing, here's an example of one of the bathrooms and the original historical toilet, which for some reason they had to put a sign on to make sure that you don't attempt to use it. And you can also tour the basement area where the staff quarters were so that you can see how a castle of this size would have been run. Obviously, this was not a medieval castle built for fortification reasons. This was simply a fancy, stately home for a wealthy family. Here's the sink in the main kitchen, which you'll notice is made of wood inside and out. And the reason for that is they felt the wood was a slightly softer material to use than stone or marble or soapstone because that would help prevent the breakage of the valuable china when you were washing them. The house is built on the very top of a hill and it has great views out over the countryside. This is looking west towards Dartmoor. And you can see how it does have a very modern feel, this castle. There's a chapel attached to it. It is now a National Trust property. And in addition to the castle itself, there are also beautiful gardens, which were also designed by the same architect, Edwin Lutyens. Here's a croquet court on the grounds. And the little inset, you've probably actually seen this bench. This is the iconic garden bench that was designed by Lutyens and is still reproduced all over the world today. And you'll see them here in New England. And you can go to garden centers right here in the United States and buy them as well. They're very popular. But they were originally designed by Edwin Lutyens for use at his country homes. Gardens are wonderful to walk around in, and even though it was fall, there were plenty of blooming flowers, and these are fall cyclamens growing in the undergrowth. As I mentioned, Castle Drogo is right on the edge of Dartmoor, which is a national park of granite uplands with lots of outcrops of granite sticking up, and also plenty of bogs, moors, heathland, and so forth. It's quite large. It's, in fact, about half the size of Middlesex County here in Massachusetts. And there's an awful lot of wildlife there, both domestic and wild. You'll see a lot of sheep and cows. There are semi-wild ponies and lots of birds, insects, even the occasional otter, although we didn't happen to see any of those. Here are the wild ponies, or I should say semi-wild. This is rush hour in Dartmoor. You do have to be careful when driving because the livestock does roam freely. And particularly at night or at dusk, you have to be very careful to watch where you're going because there are likely to be animals in the road. This sign is really not kidding. Not only are sheep frequently seen in the road, but we often saw them spontaneously lying down in the road. They would cross the road and then just decide to lay down right in front of your car and not move. The whole area is fantastic for hiking and country walks. It is very windy, and although it seems safe and open because there's not a lot of forest, you do have to be careful because the weather can be quite changeable and very suddenly go from pleasant weather to unpleasant. And it is quite possible to get lost if you're not careful, particularly if it gets foggy. This is an area of standing stones. All of Devon, and particularly Dartmoor, does have early Neolithic settlements that you can visit. This is one very small version of that, just by the side of the road. And there's a tiny village called Two Bridges. You can imagine why it's called that, in the center of Dartmoor. This is one of the two bridges. Nice old historic stone bridge. And one of the reasons for bothering to stop here is a great hike that you can do from this little village, which is all of 3 buildings, into an area called Wistman's Wood. And to get there, you walk maybe a mile or 2 from the village down this dirt farm road where you'll see plenty of livestock. We did this walk in the late afternoon, which meant that the light was beautiful as it was going down and turns the moor's wonderful colors. It's very open heath country, and what you're eventually walking to is a small hidden oak forest, which you can see off in the distance of this photo. It's a small oak copse, just a few acres. Along the way, you'll see plenty of the typical granite outcrops along the way. These are not Neolithic stones piled up. These are entirely natural granite outcrops that have been worn away by the erosion of wind and water over the millennia. Way off in the distance, that forest that you can see is Wistman's Wood. And once you get there, it's absolutely fantastic. It's a just unearthly landscape, again, particularly in the late afternoon with very low light. It's just a few acres of old gnarled oak trees that are completely covered with moss and lichens and piled up rocks underneath them. There are granite boulders covered with moss. Some of these trees are maybe 400 to 500 years old. And we were lucky enough to be there pretty much entirely by ourselves. And it just is an absolutely unearthly landscape that feels like you've gone into the Lord of the Rings or some other kind of fantasy novel. You expect to see mythological creatures like trolls or pixies hiding in the background. On the way back, this is rush hour again. And as the sun is setting, the light turns the moors a wonderful shade of lavender and gold. Driving in England can be a little bit hair-raising. Most people assume that it's because of the fact that they drive on the opposite side of the road, but I think you'll find that you actually get used to that pretty quickly. Once everybody is driving on the wrong side of the road, you find that you can do it as well. I think the harder part about driving in England is that, particularly in the countryside, the roads can be extremely narrow. The hedgerows are very close to the side of the road. They even have machines that go up and down the roads, trimming the side hedges. You can see here, there's on the left, the foliage has been trimmed up about to the level of the double-decker bus that we're behind. And on some of these country lanes, the roads are barely wide enough for one car. They will have small laybys of a couple of feet where you can squeeze over and let somebody go by you. They do even have the trimming machines actually will trim out a little triangular notch at approximately the level where your side mirror is, so that if you have to go along right at the edge of the road, your mirror won't get stuck on the shrubbery. So if you go, I would highly suggest renting the smallest possible car you can find. Moving on, we're going to head south now to the other large town in Devon, which is Plymouth. It's the Plymouth that our Plymouth in Massachusetts is named after. It's actually not the capital, that's Exeter, but it's quite a bit bigger than Exeter. It's in fact more than twice the size, with about 250,000 people. Very much a seaside town. Here you can see also it's famous for the gin distillery. It's on a couple of major rivers, one being the Plym, which is logical. It's at the mouth of the Plym, so it's Plymouth, quite logically. But the even larger Tamar River that these bridges go over, this is one of the earliest bridges in England from the Industrial Revolution. This one was built in 1859. Plymouth is a great town for being a base for exploring the area. There's lots of shops and museums. There's a really nice aquarium. The harbor side has been significantly restored to make it a destination. And there are lots of boating activities and historical sites to see in the downtown area. The harbor is guarded by this huge post-English Civil War royal citadel in the background, which was built in the 17th century, and now it is a park. You can climb up to the top and get superb views over the harbor. That modern building in the distance is the aquarium, but right in front of us, these steps that lead down to the water are the Mayflower Steps Memorial, which is the site where tradition says that the Mayflower settlers left from Plymouth to cross the Atlantic in 1620. There is also a memorial here for those who left from Plymouth to head to the New World, to the Roanoke colonies. And walking around the harbor is lovely, because you can see Plymouth Harbor is actually quite large and protected. And you can walk all the way around the headland to the lighthouse up on the top, which is called Plymouth Cove. They happened to be having a graduation ceremony for one of the local colleges while we were there. Here's a statue of Sir Francis Drake, who is connected with Plymouth. And there's lots of nice little side streets and back roads to explore, which have surprises like this hidden Elizabethan garden, which you'd never imagined was there. The main shopping street goes back down to Plymouth gin distillery that you saw at the beginning. That distillery goes back to 1793, and you can take tours if you're interested. Not far from Plymouth is a very nice stately home, and considerably different from Castle Drogo that we visited earlier. Saltram House is a stunning Georgian country house, only about 15 minutes from Plymouth, and it goes back to the 1740s, when it was an existing house there was completely remodeled by the Scottish architect Robert Adam. He is noteworthy because he really promoted the classical revival style, which ended up being named after him, the Adam style, that was popular through the 19th and even into the 20th centuries. In fact, Beebe Library here in Wakefield has a significant debt to Adam. Some of the historic parts of the buildings are very much designed in the Adam style. The I like this statue on the right-hand side, which made me think that this was a model of one of the architect's workmen. It has a very classical, symmetrical facade, which is typical of Georgian architecture. And the house was owned by the Parker family. They had an amazing collection of portraits and paintings, including several by Sir Joshua Reynolds, the famous British painter. The highlight of the house is this huge double cube drawing room. If you take two cubes, exact cubes, and put them side by side, that's the dimensions of this room. And it is considered one of Robert Adams' finest interior designs. He spent several years during the 1750s on the European continent, particularly in Greece and Rome, studying classical architecture. And that's where he got a lot of his ideas to bring back to Britain, and became one of the major influencers of the classical revival. On the right is a slightly better view of the drawing room and its amazing ceiling. And on the left is the dining room. You'll notice again that some of the ceiling detail, in particular the plaster work, is similar to that that you see in the large rooms at Beebe Library in the historic part of the building. In fact, this door in Saltham House is remarkably similar to the doors in the original historic part of Beebe Library. Here are some jars in the kitchen that were used in the 18th century to catch insects. They put sugar water and the insects would crawl inside and get stuck. The kitchens are fun to explore. They're quite huge, and you get a good idea of what it was like to run a house of this size. If you like Downton Abbey, these are the kinds of places that are interesting to visit because you get both the upstairs and downstairs view of life. There is an awful lot of copper to polish in this house. This is the upstairs, the upper portion of the central hall going up to the bedrooms, and the elegant classical library, and a view out to the lawn. In addition to the house itself, there's plenty of gardens, both formal gardens and informal gardens to explore. Here are some classical statuary replicas in the niches, and lots of gardens to explore. This is an original tea house that's now used as a cafe on the grounds. Heading north, we're going to take a quick trip to the north coast at Exmoor, which is the other major national park. It's considerably smaller than Dartmoor, but similar in terms of the geography and the wildlife and the landscape. In fact, the River Exe rises in Exmoor and heads south to the English Channel. On the northern coast are two wonderful little paired villages, one up high and one down low, called Linton and Lynmouth. Linton is, which you can see here, is nestled in a little dell at the top of the cliffs and has a terrific Victorian feel to it. Many of the buildings are from the 19th century resort period. This is Town Hall and an old hotel. The High Street with Victorian architecture on it, and the local history museum. There's also a parish church from the 13th century that perches on the cliff edge. This is the churchyard right behind it that looks out over the coast. And down below Linton is Lynmouth, which again, logically, is of course at the mouth of the Lynn, which you can see coming out here on the left. There are great views up and down the coast in both directions, and you can take country walks along the cliffs. The towns are connected by a funicular that goes up and down. Lynmouth itself, which is considerably smaller than Linton, is in a gorge that's about 700 feet deep that has some nice river hikes that you can do if you go inland. And its small harbor. can see a few of the guest houses and hotels of Linton way up on the cliff at the top, and a Pebble Beach. Here's me being fun. There's a fountain at a museum right at the base of the gorge that talks about the history of water power in the area, because the Lynn River produces significant water power for the surrounding area. The funicular that takes you from one town to the other was opened in 1890 and has just two cars that go up and down, back and forth. It's interesting in how it works. It's powered by gravity. Each of the cars is powered by water tanks that take water from the river and then gradually let it out, and gravity pulls the cars past each other up and down. There are many lovely guest houses and hotels along the cliff tops and the bottoms as well. There are coastal paths that go for hundreds of miles on the British coast, and this stretch is particularly beautiful and popular for walking. If you look straight north across the Bristol Channel, you would come out at the Sea of Swansea in Wales. It's about 25 miles north. This particular path, it's very safe, but it's kind of precipitous. You can tell that it's not necessarily a good place to go if you have vertigo. But the views are gorgeous, particularly on a lovely day like we had. And it is flat, although it's very high up. It's not a lot of hiking. It's pretty stable and flat. And so there's not a lot of hiking that's tough on your knees. It heads west to a small valley called the Valley of Rocks, which is just inland from these cliffs and kind of parallel behind the hills. And at the end, you can climb up to the rocks that you can see high up on the cliffs for fantastic views. Here's a couple of bird watchers looking out over the countryside. The whole Exmoor region is gorgeous, and it's known for being the country where the fictional character Born at Doon by Richard Blackmore was set. In fact, this little copse that you can see down in the valley is the town where the village is, the area where the village that Lorna Doone takes place is set. Just down the coast, a few miles east, and even smaller than Linton and Lynmouth, is a town called Porlock. Technically, this is no longer in Devon. It's actually just over the border in Somerset. It's known for having the most elderly population in all of Britain, and also, probably more importantly for tourists, for the incredibly steep road that goes down to it, which has a 25% grade down the hills. When you get down to the bottom, Porlock Weir at the fishing harbor is at the end of the long gravel beach. Here you can see it's low tide. The whole area is a protected nature reserve with salt marshes, beautiful thatched houses, and still a very, very much an active fishing port. And a little bit further down the coast, also technically in Somerset, just a few miles away, is a group of tiny hamlets that are part of the old Honeycutt estate, which had over 12,000 acres. Selworthy itself, one of the small hamlets, is over 1,000 years old, but most of what you see now is actually from the 1820s, when it was built as a model village for the elderly on the grounds of the Honeycutt estate. So most of the buildings that you see now are only about 200 years old and all have a very similar look and feel. The most important building in the whole village is the 15th century Church of All Saints beautiful churches in southern England, particularly in the late afternoon as the sun hits it. It's very whitewashed and very warm in the afternoon sun. It has also a stunning view out over the Exmoor landscape, over its churchyard. The interior is particularly striking for its barrel vaulted ceiling. You'll notice that there isn't a lot of stained glass. Most of the glass in this church is actually clear, but it's still very beautiful and has a sort of glowing crystal feel to it. The interior balcony that you can see here was once used by the family, the Honeycutt family, during services. And the tower that is on the outside is actually a century older than the rest of the church. It's the only church in the area that's still whitewashed, and they do re-whitewash it regularly to keep it looking as clean as it is. But many of the churches in this area would have originally been whitewashed, although most of them are no longer. The other buildings in the town, as I said, are very traditional thatched roof style cottages. And they are lime washed just like the church, although they're mostly tinted in bright colors like yellow or pink. Some of the buildings can actually be stayed in as a guest house, and there's also one that's used as a very elegant tea room. Zipping back down to the south coast again, we're going to stop in Dartmouth, which is a small, elegant, stylish town at the estuary of the Dart. Again, the River Dart, so the town at the end of it is, at the mouth, is Dartmouth. The river mouth here in Dartmouth is quite wide, and here we're looking across to the village of Kingsware on the opposite shore. Much of the town of Dartmouth is actually built on reclaimed land on what were once tidal flats, very similar to Back Bay here in Boston. It's a huge boating destination. There is still fishing done here, but much of it is now pleasure craft. There are lots of shops and restaurants and very elegant buildings with nice atmosphere, a lot of pedestrian zones. The inner harbor, which is very protected, you can see here by these big granite piers, is surrounded by elegant Georgian buildings. There's also a summer regatta in Dartmouth and a traditional steam tourist train. And of course, there's plenty to eat. So if you need a Devon cream tea or something to tide you over before your next stroll around the town, there's a number of places to stop. There's several churches in Dartmouth, but the most interesting one is St. Saviour's Anglican Church from the 14th century, which has a superb carved and painted rood screen and pulpit, which you can see on the right. Those are from the 15th century. There's also, in addition to those carvings, there's a remarkable wood and metal door that you can see here on the left that dates to 1631. It has a tree of life on it and leopards made out of wrought iron. The whole town has glorious Victorian architecture that's remarkably cheery, even on a gray day like we had. There are actually no bridges in Dartmouth itself. The closest one across the river is about 11 miles inland, but there are several car and passenger ferries that cross the river so that you can jump across to the other side without having to drive inland. Here's one of the car ferries. And if you keep going a little further east, you will come to Torquay, which is on what's known as the English Riviera. Torquay is another of the large towns in Devon with about 65,000 people. And it was once a major fishing port, and to some degree still is. But in the 19th century, it reinvented itself as a fashionable seaside resort. Here's our bed and breakfast perched way up on the hill. Very comfortable. So harbor has plenty of things to do. There are lots of yachts and pleasure boats. There's a promenade that allows you to walk around the entire harbor, and lots of beautiful, elegant Georgian architecture. You can take boat trips up and down the coast. Um, it's also a great place to visit if you have any interest in Agatha Christie. You can see a sculpture of her on the left. She was born here in Torquay, and there are a number of sites connected to her life, and a walking tour around the town that will teach you about her life and experience and her writings. The woman on the right, I photographed only because she reminded me so much of Patsy, the character that Joanna Lumley plays in AFAB, if you've ever seen that British comedy. It is an elegant town, and here is the clock tower down on the waterfront and one of the posh seaside hotels. But it is still a fishing town in much the same way that Gloucester here in Massachusetts is a mix of real working port and tourist town as well. But there are gardens and a casino in the waterfront park. Another British comedy that you might remember from the old days is Fawlty Towers. Fawlty Towers with John Cleese was set here in Torquay, and the building that it was filmed at was no longer exists, but you'll see a lot of very similar kinds of houses, many of which are guest houses now throughout the town. You'll note in this picture that there are palm trees. That's because of the Gulf Stream, which is so close to the southern coast of England and keeps it warm much of the year. We did manage to get home just in time before this fantastic storm hit the waterfront over the boardwalk. And again, continuing our circuit back east, we stopped at a small town called Ottery St. Mary's, which is in East Devon. And the main reason for visiting here, it's a fairly small town, and the big reason you'd want to stop is to see their fantastic church. But if you happen to be a fan of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was born here in 1772, so you might want to stop for that reason as well. The church goes back to the year 1260 and is incredibly elaborate for a small parish church. It's almost like a smaller version of Exeter Cathedral with two stocky towers and an incredible amount of detailing for such a small local church that isn't a major cathedral. The interior is quite elaborate. It has a churchyard and amazing carvings inside, including an entire aisle of very detailed fan vaulting off on the side. And it's also known for its 16th century elegant painted ceiling that you can see on the left. The fan vaulting that you see on the right is a very particularly British style that you'll see mostly in the United Kingdom rather than on the continent. It's a very typical English style that I think probably the most famous example, aside from Exeter, is probably in Westminster Cathedral, Westminster Abbey in London. Ottery St. Mary's also has, in addition to the gorgeous ceiling, some very beautiful, finely carved choir pews as well. And to finish up, we're going to be heading towards the east. This is Sidmouth, another elegant seaside town, once a fishing village. It's considered the gateway to what's called the Jurassic Coast. It's an elegant Georgian town, which with a beachfront, sort of pebble beach, and a promenade flanked by these huge cliffs. The reason it's called the Jurassic Coast is that this stretch of coastline along the English Channel, which is about 100 miles long, has geological strata that are quite visible from the eroded coastline. And you can see the layers as you walk along the beaches. It's a UNESCO heritage area, and there's lots of great hiking and a number of beautiful towns sprinkled along it. Here's a ford that you have to cross in vehicle traffic. On the day that we were there, it happened to be closed because of the water being unusually high from the big storms that had come through the night before. You can hike up through the woods, through a kind of dark forest, and then when you get to the top, there are these just spectacular views up and down the coastline with great views of the cliffs. The boardwalk is a very pleasant area fronted by shops and hotels and restaurants. These are some of the Georgian hotels. With a very pleasant seaside feel to it. Much of the town is also pedestrianized. So as you walk away from the water, there are lots of areas to explore with shops and restaurants. And just down the coast, the next cute little town to visit is called Beer. Beer is actually very tiny, only about 1,300 people, but it's delightful. And it's almost like a miniature Sidmouth. The name, although the name is amusing, it actually has nothing to do with the beverage. It comes from an old English word, beer, meaning grove. And that's because beer, even today, still has quite a few areas of forest around it. The charming town center winds its way down the valley and eventually comes out at this pebble beach, which is very popular with surfers. And like all the other places in the area, you can hike up to the top of the cliffs. And from there, you can get a view over the fields and down to the town nestled in its valley. The inland area along the Devon coast is also quite beautiful. There's a rainbow in the background and grazing sheep and small villages and farmhouses. There were plentiful blackberries in season while we were there. And even watching the sheep commuting home from work. Beer doesn't have a whole lot of exciting tourist activities other than just enjoying the pleasant town and the beach, which makes it a nice, quiet, kind of out of the way place to stay. From the top of the cliffs, you can see the next town along the stretch, which is Seaton Down, that has a particularly nice beach. You can see all the brightly colored beach houses along the coast. And we're going to finish in West Bay, which technically is just over the border in Dorset. You probably know West Bay better by its name of Broadchurch, which is, of course, entirely fictional. But if you've seen Broadchurch, the popular, I think it was 3 seasons, British mystery series starring David Tennant and Olivia Colman and Jodie Whittaker. David Tennant and Jodie Whittaker have both gone on to be just as famous for their roles as Doctor Who. But it's a great mystery series, which if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to watch. It's very well done. And they filmed much of the show here in this town. In fact, this shot shows the very famous cliff where, well, I won't give you any spoilers, but there's the death that the mystery is based on takes place right at the base of this cliff. While we were there was some wild weather with high winds and surf, which was kind of appropriate for such a wild town way at the end of its beach here. It feels very much at the end of the world. The harbor is protected by some granite breakwaters, and there's a lot of local fishing there. You can see another approaching storm off in the distance. There are a lot of good fish restaurants and pubs, but it's basically an outdoorsy kind of town. with lots of outdoor activities, surfing, windsurfing, hiking, that sort of thing. And this is the protected harbor behind the big granite breakwater. The modern building that you can see here may look familiar if you saw the TV series. It was the police station where David Tennant and Olivia Colman investigated the mystery. But in fact, in real life, it's just a modern apartment building by the ocean. And you may also recognize this, the little blue houseboat on the right is the one that David Tennant's character lived in the series. And we're going to finish in Wiltshire. Here I am with David and my friend Marianne, also a librarian, now retired and living not far from Stonehenge, where she's originally from. And this is just us spending an enjoyable afternoon taking the dogs for a walk in the countryside, which is a very typical British thing to do. So we're going to finish here. That's it for now. And I want to thank you for traveling with me. And I hope you'll join me again at the library, online, or on WCAT for more destinations. So thank you and keep exploring.